give people a minute to connect. All right, welcome everyone. This is the September 23rd Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund Grants Committee meeting. And we're gonna switch up the order of the beginning just a tiny bit to do a little bit less switching back and forth and screen sharing. And we're gonna start with an opening inspiration. Janet is gonna kick things off, and then we'll have a short video after that, and then we'll move into the rest of the agenda. Janet?
Yeah, great to see you all this evening. As you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, passed away last Friday at the age of 87. And while her passing is not a source of inspiration, her life and contributions are. She was born to an immigrant family in a working class neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, Joan Ruth Bader. She applied her keen intellect and strong sense of justice to better the world, navigating discrimination and adversity along the way. At one point, she was chastised by Harvard's law school dean for taking a spot that could have gone to a man. And despite graduating first in her class and being the only woman to have served on both the Harvard Law Review and the Columbia Law Review, she was unable to land a job offer when she graduated. With persistence and grace, she prevailed both as a lawyer and then as a judge, making significant contributions to the advancement of women's rights, workers' rights, LGBTQ rights, and other equity issues. RBG believed that difference could be acknowledged and appreciated, but not used to constrain an individual's opportunity, and that any differences in treatment must not create or perpetuate legal, social, or economic inferiority. Justice Ginsburg inspires us with her dignity, her tenacity, her willingness to admit mistakes and to grow, and her commitment to inclusion and justice. She helped to open many doors, and we are grateful for that legacy. This Friday, Justice Ginsburg will lie in state at our nation's capital, notably the first woman and the first Jew to do so. We'd like to share a brief video of Justice Ginsburg in her own words. May her memory be an inspiration.
If you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside yourself, something to repair tears in your community.
No door should be closed to people willing to spend the hours of effort needed to make dreams come true.
We are a nation made strong by people like you.
In my lifetime, I expect to see 3, 4, perhaps even more women on the High Court bench. Women not shaped from the same mold, but of different complexions. We are at last beginning to relegate to history books the days of the token, one at a time woman.
The number of women who have come forward as a result of the Me Too movement has been astonishing. My hope is not just that it is here to stay, but that it is as effective for the woman who works as a maid in a hotel as it is for Hollywood stars.
I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner who believed at age 18 when we met that a woman's work, whether at home or on the job, is as important as a man's.
It helps sometimes to be a little deaf. I have followed that advice assiduously, and not only at home through 56 years of a marital partnership, I have employed it as well in every workplace, including the Supreme Court of the United States. When a thoughtless or unkind word is spoken, best tune out. Reacting in anger or annoyance will not advance one's ability to persuade. To make life a little better for people less fortunate than you. That's what I think a meaningful life is. One lives not just for oneself, but for one's community. So much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. So, can everybody see my screen now? Yep, okay, great. So we can move on with the rest of the meeting. So I'm just going to start by going over, as we do at the beginning of every meeting, some of the virtual participation guidelines. The committee meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to comment at around 6:10 p.m., maybe a few minutes after that today. And the chat box is open during the meeting. We ask that folks, members of the public, put your name, if you have an organizational affiliation, and if you'd like to share your preferred pronouns, to put those into the chat box now so that we can include you and introduce you, and so everybody kind of knows who's at the meeting. Also, if you want to give public comment, that's a good, the chat box is also where we ask that you indicate your interest to do that. So the chat box is open now if folks want to start doing that. The raise hand function is reserved for committee members, and we ask that only the committee members and staff who are participating in the meeting have their videos on, except for folks who are giving public comment. And if you want to turn your video on, then you're more than welcome to. This meeting is being recorded, and normally we do have closed captioning provided. Today we had, I think, maybe a little bit of a scheduling mishap, and so we don't have closed captioning real time for this meeting, but when we post it, when we post the recording online, we'll provide closed captioning then. So next, we'll move on to introductions, and we'll start with committee members. So we'll start with Maria.
Hi, Maria Sippin, she, they pronouns, committee member.
Michael?
You caught me with a mouthful of food.
Oh, sorry.
Committee member.
Megan?
Hey everybody, Megan Horst, she, her, committee member.
Rantis?
Rainfeast, Giantino Vittoro, committee member, he, him.
Andrea?
Andrea Hamburg, committee member, she, her.
Shanice?
Shanice Clark, committee member, she, they.
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Moreland, committee member, he, him.
Faith?
Hi, y'all. I missed you last week. Faith Graham, she, her, committee member.
And Robin Wang is our other committee member who is excused from tonight's meeting. So now we'll move to Psf Staff, and we'll start with James.
Hi, everybody. James Valdez, Psf Staff, he, him.
Janet?
Good evening. Janet Hammer, Psf Staff, she, her.
Wendy?
Wendy Kelfkin, Psf Staff, she, her.
And I'm Katie Lister, Psf Staff, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'll pass it to Sam.
Hi, folks. Sam Brasso, Psf Staff, he, him. And with us tonight, and actually, go ahead, let's turn it maybe to, well, we'll turn it to Gordon here in a minute. With us tonight, I'll just read off the introductions. Deidre Shoes, Nutrition Garden RX, she, her. We've got Anissa Pemberton, they, them, PCEF Community Coalition. We got Gordon Friedman with us from the City Auditor's Office, who will introduce himself shortly. We've got Angela Providelli, she, her, BPS Staff. Got Micah Meskel, he, him, Portland Audubon. We got Michael Human from the Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good, MACG. Got Emily Davis, she, her, Kelly Nonprofit Consulting. Maggie Johnson, she, her, Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare Director of Housing. And Steve Achilles, Exceed Enterprises, he, him.
And James, is there anyone who is just dialed in on the phone to the meeting?
I do not see anybody on phone, no.
Okay, great. And it doesn't look like anyone signed up for public comment. So we will pass. The first thing on the agenda tonight is a presentation by Gordon Freeman, who's from the City Auditor's Office. So Gordon, I'll advance your slides if you want to just give me a nod when to do so, and we can go from there.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Gordon Friedman. I am a performance auditor with the City Auditor's Office, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of the City Auditor's Office and the very recently launched audit of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So you can go ahead to the next one. Excuse me. Just for a bit of background, the city auditor is Portland's 6th elected official and is independent from the city council, which includes the mayor and the other city commissioners. And so I work for the city auditor, Mary Hull Caballero, and she's independently elected, and we all report directly to the residents of Portland. Next slide, please. Performance auditing is different than what you might think of when you hear the word audit, like the government coming to look and see whether you've paid your taxes. That's not what we do. What performance auditing is we look for evidence weighed against a criteria, which basically means how is something performing versus how should it perform. And we do that in all the different areas of city government, whether it's police, parks, water and sewer services. The audits that we do are chosen by the city auditor and informed by community input. And the Clean Energy Fund was one of the audits she chose this year. And what we do is evaluate what's happening versus what should be happening so that we can create a report that can be used by the public, city staff, and elected officials to improve how the program is operating. Next slide, please. And I apologize if the images are a little small here, but these are just the covers of a couple of notable reports that we've had somewhat recently. The one on the left, we did an audit of the city's gang enforcement team, and that the findings there helped play a role in the city changing how it does gang enforcement, disbanding one of its teams that sort of reformed and then was disbanded again. But the findings there helped to create some better public accountability for what the police were doing in our neighborhoods. The one in the middle is a report that I worked on that was released just a few weeks ago. We examined the city's programs for improving equity in construction contracting and made a lot of recommendations on how to improve that system. And then on the right, report that was published in August looked at the enhanced service districts in Portland, some sort of controversial ways that the city engages with private businesses to control what's going on in the streets there. So these are the kind of things that we're interested in, and we end up writing a report that is available for the public. Next slide, please. So what's going on with the Clean Energy Fund audit? The truth is we launched the project less than 10 days ago. So it's very much in the early stages. Audits tend to take about 6 to 9 months because we gather a whole lot of information to try and figure out where our attention is most needed and most important. You know, we want to go where there might be something that could use some improvement. You know, if there's something that is just going stellar, we're going to note that in the report, but we're not going to spend a bunch of time and energy on that. But right now we're just gathering information. Some of you I may have contacted some of you to ask for an interview. We try and talk to a lot of people, probably talk to at least several dozen people to get information on what is going on with PCEF and where they think we should focus. We use documents, we use data, and as well as the testimonial interviews to help understand what's going on. And then we're going to scope the audit and basically say, okay, here's where we want to focus. We'll be communicating with Sam and probably the oversight committee about that. And then we'll perform the audit work, write the report, and it will get released to the public. Next slide, please. So here's sort of the catch-all slide with contact information. It's got my email address there. You're welcome to go on to our website and suggest an audit topic. We love to hear from the public about things that they feel we should look at. It's totally anonymous. And I also included a call out to the city's fraud hotline. I'm an investigator on that program as well. Totally anonymous. You can make a complaint of fraud, waste, or abuse. And we would love to hear from you if you would like to speak with us to help guide us toward an important focus for the audit. And the truth is, if you're on the oversight committee or you're one of these well-informed people who's attending these meetings, which I know most of you are, I'm probably going to reach out to you and ask permission for some of your time, and hopefully we can have a conversation. So that's it for me, and thank you for inviting me to the meeting, and I'm probably just going to observe, and I look forward to talking with you all.
Thanks, Gordon. Any committee member comments or anything?
I did want to add maybe one thing, if that's all right. Sorry, just the housekeeping. So as I think most of you know, the ballot measure and city code has language that requires a periodic performance audit of the Clean Energy Fund. And this audit will be able to count as that first performance audit and comply with that language.
All right, well, before we move on to the next topic in the meeting, which is kind of the meatiest section of the meeting, the bylaws, we're going to pause for a minute and approve minutes. You all received minutes from August 12th and September 9th, and I just like to ask committee members if there are any edits, comments, corrections, changes to either of those minutes. All right, seeing none, we will call those approved and move on to bylaws. Sam, are you going to start this presentation?
Just to open it up, and then I'll kick it off to James.
Okay.
So just, Gordon, I just want to say thank you, and then just add a little bit to that last piece there. This will serve exactly as it will qualify or meet our obligations for our performance audit that happens every 2 years. And we also have a financial audit requirement annually. So that's something we will be contracting for as well. So the bylaws are something of a work in progress. It's been, I will acknowledge that I appreciate that if I think about where we started and where we are here today, you know, one of our first meaty discussions that substantially took a lot longer than we all anticipated was how this body makes decisions. Both it was the first decision-making discussion that the first 5 committee members had, and then a substantially longer discussion that all 9 committee members had. So since then, we've operated with that as a core element of our bylaws, and now it's important that we continue and build out the rest of our bylaws. So I know you all have seen this a few times. We're gonna, I know Robin wasn't here isn't here today, but he did email some comments. So I'll just bring up some of those comments that Robin did email in as we go through some of the core bylaw elements and see if there's any discussion left before potentially seeing if you all want to take action. So with that, I'll turn it over to James to walk us through. Next slide.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks to all of you. And yeah, so this is really kind of picking up on the conversation that has been evolving for a while, and that we focused a little bit on the last meeting. And I guess we could approach this in a few different ways. I could share the actual document, but I thought it would be good to first kind of highlight some of the elements where we, I guess, suggest some conversation to happen, or we can focus on elements where people had questions in the bylaws and then focus on those. I'd say that in general, if you go to the next slide, Katie, I think it's the same. One of the core elements of discussion that I hope we can engage in today is around the number of terms that you would envision as a committee, each committee member serving, and the maximums on those. And so we started that discussion in the last meeting, and this is an opportunity to continue that and share some more reflections as you've had a little bit of time to think about that. And then we can go into some other elements if you would like clarification or focus on different elements of the bylaws. And then we can also, as Sam mentioned, address a few questions that Robin had and some kind of formatting and clarity pieces. But I think starting with the term limit conversation is probably a good place to begin. So I guess opening the floor up for committee thoughts about term limits. And again, many thanks to Michael and Andrea for their work in helping develop these bylaws and putting them forward and editing them. Seeing no comments.
And not to put, I don't want to put Andrea or Michael on the spot, but it might be helpful to have a refresher of the kind of pros and cons around the term limit conversation, if Andrea or Michael, if you're willing.
Or I could provide that, but yeah, I think one of the committee members or subcommittee members, if you want to highlight some of those, that'd be.
Sure. I mean, we did introduce this a little bit at our last meeting also. And I think we keep coming back to this because there's the question of turnover and the opportunity to bring in new perspectives and experiences to this decision-making body versus the amount of time that it can take to come into a role like this and learn the work and wanting to find some way to balance those two things. And kind of looking at all of those things, this is what we propose, but we also considered a single 4-year term or in fact 6 years to allow for the fact for those people in this first kind of odd 2-year term thing to serve 6 years, but that would be the max. Anything you want to add to that, Michael?
I guess I would add that, I think you got our big points of between 4 and 8. I guess my concerns with 8 years were sort of institutional questions, that if we have things that aren't going well, that we can get entrenched in that over a period of time, and then it's hard to change. Whereas when new perspectives come in, it's harder to get entrenched into bad habits or entrenched into ideas that aren't working. And I feel like 8 years, oftentimes 8 years is, that's sort of the edge of, I guess, entrenchment. But I guess that was one of my worries. My other worry about 8 years is that 8 years it's a long service time. It is a long time to ask of someone. And of course, this isn't required, right? Like you can step out after 4, as we know. But 8 years it's a long ask, and it often feels to me that that's an ask that is when you say you can serve up to 8 years, that when you come on, you're expected to maybe do those 8 years. 4 years, my concerns around 4 years are that people won't have time to get comfortable. We've all had the opportunity to sort of work on this from scratch. So we all are, I'm comfortable in it right now. I don't know, I can't speak for everybody else, but I'm sure that if I came on after, during the second round, or after the first 4 years were up, if I was a second committee member, second round committee member, that I would need more than probably the little over a year we've had to get used to it, and to find my place in it. I don't know, those are some of the additional concerns that I had.
Yeah, thank you both. And just to highlight, as the bylaws are currently written, the recommendation is for a maximum of 2 8-year terms, or 2 4-year terms. Also noting that partial terms do not count towards that total if somebody is appointed in a kind of off cycle. So yeah, for the first cohort that was appointed. So yeah, other committee perspectives or considerations that you want to elevate?
Like Faith?
Thank you all for the hard work on this, and I share all the concerns that you shared on both directions. So I think coming down, obviously you just have to make a decision. And my guess is something that you just highlighted, Michael, which is many people will self-select, right? How long, and 8 years is a really long time to serve, or 10 in the case of those that were, those of us who came on the second term around. So, so this feels fine to me. I think that the 8 years also provides more opportunity for the staggering, so that the historical knowledge isn't completely lost. Because if we did 4, then maybe all of us would cycle off in 4 years, and then there would be a whole new host of folks. So to me, that gives a little bit more opportunity for that staggering, which feels important. And I guess I would like, maybe this is in our working agreements, where we stress that the expectation is not 8 years, that if you sign on, the expectation is a single term, but that, for those that want to and can stay, then that's an opportunity. I'm curious about the decision to say that partial terms don't count towards the full term. Is that, what was the, how did you guys talk about that?
So that is to account for the staggered term of the initial versus the last 4 of the appointees in the committee. And just to address something you raised, Faith, I don't think that there's a situation in which there'd be complete board turnover in a given year, because of that staggering that is intentionally built into the structure, unless there was kind of midterm resignation, I guess would be the. But Sam, it looked like you might have wanted to speak to that too. So
it's just to bring clarity to it. It's that completion of an unexpired term does not count towards the cumulative 8-year cumulative. And the rationale there, if I'm trying to remember right, it was exactly that. It was, we wanted to preserve the staggered term. So kind of putting aside this weird 2-year term that exists, because this will really only exist for this first cohort. Every other cohort, in a future cohort, someone resigns after a couple years of a 4-year term, then that individual would come back, would fill out the balance of their term, and then they'd still have 2 full terms that they could engage in as part of like their getting to an 8-year term. So I think it was just to make sure that someone. I'm trying to remember if Andrew, Michael, you all remember other rationale. It was that we wanted to make sure everyone had at least 8 years to be, if 8 years was going to be the limit, it was that everyone had at least 8 years.
Right.
And that, and making sure that a term is always a term. You know, when someone begins a term, they don't get a full new term. They're always completing the balance of someone else's term, so it preserves the staggered nature of the committee.
Correct, because people resign, people have life changes. And so if somebody leaves early, then that doesn't, and we appoint somebody to their position. If there's a year left, if there's 3 years left, it doesn't matter that those 3 years don't count towards your 8-year maximum.
Ranfis?
Just so I'm, my apologies if I'm been yawning, I'm getting some coffee here. Just so I understand correctly on the, as I'm reading this, just so I understand it correctly, it says here 8 years of total consecutive service. So just so I'm understanding correctly, consecutive to me means, you know, 8 years consecutively. So, so if I were to take a 4-year term, and then, you know, took a break 4 years, came back, I could take an 8-year consecutive term. So a total of 12 staggered.
That is correct. That is correct.
Correct.
You have to do, if you look a little further in, you'll notice that you do have to, after 8 years, you do have to take a 2-year break before you can reapply. If you want to continue service beyond those 8 years, you do have to take a 2-year break.
Thank you. Yeah,
and Ramp, if I'm going to recall that from a discussion perspective, this was discussed quite a bit, and I mean the rationale was in the end, it's the committee. The committee is the body that would have to still nominate you back. So if it is, it's sort of the potential exists, but it's still the committee. Yeah, it would be up to the committee to make that decision.
And if the committee were concerned about issues of either needing continuity and feeling like that wasn't present, or needing, you know, new energy, that would be the opportunity for the committee to make that kind of decision of whether or not to bring a previously serving committee member back on. So yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that helps. Yeah, no, I think it helps clarify just that question, and yeah, thank you in terms of also providing explanation in terms of terms and balances. I'll just say for me, you know, I appreciate all the thought put into this. You know, I think 8 years is definitely a long time, but I do see the value in that as well. I think for me personally, as a goal, especially as a, you know, representative of the, you know, east of 82nd block, if you will, you know, I definitely want to see many different leaders in this seat, and see people, you know, have people see themselves in this type of leadership position, regardless where they are in their life, regardless of income bracket or educational level or age or demographic. So, you know, I think, you know, as I review this, I'll be keeping that lens in mind. But, you know, I think for me, as a personal goal is I definitely want to see not only a plethora of leadership, but definitely the space for people to grow and exceed. And as you've all noted, sometimes it does take some time to get your ground firm in terms of their leadership role in this committee, especially if you're around peers who may have been here longer. So definitely appreciate that, and I'll reserve any other questions as we go through each of these bullet points.
I see Jeffrey has his hand up.
Yeah, so you said the current recommendation is to do 4-year terms, and obviously the goal is to do 2 terms to hit the 8. Is that, you said recommendation? Is that correct, James?
Correct, yes. To have 8 years of consecutive service be the recommendation that's the bylaws currently, but with that caveat or exception that a partial term doesn't count towards that.
And given the current structure of our committee, considering the first 5, I think, got on a year before the last 4, they already have that natural stagger, at least by a year. Is that correct? Or were they on longer than that?
What it would allow is for the committee members that were brought on that have a partial term or an initial 2-year, you all could serve up to a total of 10 years because it would that would be counted as a partial term.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, so that would be the structure. But going from there on, there would be no more 2-year terms really. The expectation for every term would be 4 years with up to 2 4-year terms.
Okay.
It is a little confusing. I recognize.
This may be a question to check in on collectively. James, I'm not, as we read this, I'm not sure. The inaugural committee, for the inaugural committee, as we're reading,
I could be wrong. Yeah.
A 4-year term, and the 4 seats have a 2-year term. So it wasn't a partial term. The term was 2 years, and so the latter,
I was going to say, I don't think that. I don't think we're looking at a 10-year possible term for this group of people. I think we're looking at a 6-year.
6-year. Okay. Yeah. Apologies. I think you are correct in that the PCEF ballot initiative does count that 2-year period as a term.
So we're really looking at Amanda, right? Amanda will serve out the remainder of my 2-year term, and that won't prevent her from having 2 full 4-year terms.
Correct. And then also, just as a quick reminder, we were the first 5 were not on for a year before we got the second 4. We were there for 2 months, maybe.
Yeah,
was all
about 2.5 months.
60 days behind. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Thank you all for the clarification, and apologies for misspeaking on that. Yeah. Yes, that is correct. That for those appointed to the 2-year term, the maximum that you would be able to serve would be 6 years total.
And it might be that we just want to put that in there, that the just for the inaugural 2-year term maxes out at 6, just for clarification's sake in the bylaws. It's something that will only count for the first 2 terms for the 2-year people, but we might want to put it in there just to make sure that that is clear.
Making a note of that right now.
And I also just want to say,
Sorry, Maria, I saw your hand go up, but then it disappeared. Did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I did. I wanted clarification too on the qualifications for serving on the committee for the bylaws and for the ballot measure. Is it still inclusive of people who live, work, worship, and play in Portland, or is it confined to people who live in Portland? Just as I'm thinking through people's eligibility to serve.
The bylaws are a little, Sam, go ahead and.
The code is folks who reside in Portland, and so I mean that was something that I know we came up with the recruitment, given that civic life recruitment looks for live, work, pray, and play, versus the bylaws for PCEF are about residing. So it's something we can come to, but that is in the code. So it's what we carried in. It should be carried in here as well. Or at least by reference, it's not directly noted here.
Other questions or clarifications on this element of the bylaws? Renfis, you have your hand up?
Maybe Michael had already addressed this, but maybe for clarity's sake, because I would have probably interpreted this differently around 2 terms or 6 terms for the initial group, or 8 total consecutive services. But maybe it'd be slightly clear if we said cannot exceed 2 consecutive terms versus exceed 8 years. But maybe it's just semantics. Maybe it's already taken care of, because I would assumed you could do 3 terms so long as you meet this term limit criteria of not serving 8 consecutive years. So regardless what the original intent is, depending on who's interpreting this, I know how we're interpreting this right now in this discussion. For clarity's sake, for posterity's sake, I think you might be cleaner if we're thinking about this from a consecutive term standpoint.
So your language edit suggestion is just to change it from terms. So the sentence would read: committee members may serve any number of terms. Well, no, any number of terms not to exceed two consecutive terms.
2 complete consecutive terms.
2 complete.
Yeah.
Okay. I've made that edit.
And we'll run this by my in the city attorney's office, just to make sure that that we're not misreading something, but assuming that there's not any concerns there.
Terms of service. Okay. All right.
And then I guess it would also continue on to completion of an unexpired term does not apply towards the 2-term cumulative.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've captured those edits in the draft document. So there is another place where term limits come up as well. I don't know if the committee is ready to move on from the overall committee terms to another kind of sub-element of that, or are there more questions about?
Can we just see if there's anybody that has any objections or no vote concerns about the 2-term limit?
Well, I guess given that I offered that amendment, I guess it does change the second part here. So if I guess 2 complete terms, we agree those are 8 years. But if you're finishing someone's expired term, you could theoretically be doing up to 11 years or more. So I don't know, again, if was the original intent as you all were thinking about this, but maybe that's where maybe capping it 8 years being supposed to.
That was our original intent, was you could serve up to, by accident, 11 years and 11 years, 11 months and 28 days.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, any other concerns or potential edits on the overall term limit? Okay, seeing none, I wanted to go to another element of term limits, which has to do with the proposal for co-chairs or co-chair people. And as this is currently written, the co-chairs could, which is envisioned as 2 individuals, could each serve up to 3 years total of consecutive service as co-chair of the committee. That is in section 7, officers and subcommittees. If helpful, I can put the document up on the screen. I'm happy to do so if people would rather have that. And also for people on that aren't looking at this document, those materials are posted on the PCEF website under the committee meeting. So the current language says term limits of a maximum of 3 years of consecutive service shall apply to the co-chairs, and co-chairs' appointment shall be reviewed with the committee once per calendar year. Also noting that co-chairs shall be permitted to resign at any time. So I guess generally, the structure of 3 years would encourage rotation of those roles throughout the committee, but it could ensure that within even a single term that each committee member served, that there would be at least one rotation of co-chairs. Andrea and Michael, I don't know if you want to speak to this element as well, and some of the thinking behind it.
Do we need to actually unpack the question about co-chairs versus chair, vice chair? Because it's actually a decision that the committee hasn't weighed on.
Yeah, very good point.
So I'll just say we're proposing a co-chair model. Kind of when we looked at the kinds of duties that the chair will be expected to take on, such as media engagement, participation in city council meetings as required to speak for the committee, etc. We thought that might work great as a divided role. And rather than splitting that in some chair, vice chair way, just taking those sets of duties and asking a pair of people to divide them in ways that worked for their personal, professional, and experience and desires. Each time there was a set of co-chairs, just made that conversation a little bit easier to navigate, we thought.
An additional piece of context is that the division of those roles would be articulated and worked out in the working agreement document, but not explicitly defined in the bylaws. And so the bylaws are kind of, again, what kind of create the relationship between the committee here and the city and staff, but then the working agreements are more the internal practices and protocols that you would have as a committee, and that's where the assignment of roles between the two co-chairs would live, and that would be revisited both annually, as well as whenever a new committee member came into the committee, and so that's kind of two process checks in which a review of the working agreement would happen. But the bylaws are a slightly more static document that just more broadly define the responsibilities of the chairs as a entity, not the individual responsibilities of each one of the two co-chairs.
Correct. And can I add to that?
Oh, absolutely.
I think one of the things that Andrea and I had been talking about in our subcommittee was that part of co-chairs is that there's a list of responsibilities that they have, but that the co-chairs, those lists, one of the ways we're looking at in the working agreements is that list would not actually be assigned out. This is to A and this is to B. It would be up to the co-chairs to decide what responsibilities they wanted based on their strengths, their work loads, whatever. That wouldn't be necessarily up to the committee to decide what roles they each played. It would be up to the co-chairs to decide. And then when one steps down or when their terms end, then the new co-chairs, or if another co-chair comes in, someone leaves, they get to renegotiate those roles to their strengths and desires.
Faith?
I don't have any concerns whatsoever with this. The terms, I don't feel strongly about 3 years, but I think there's it makes a lot of sense to have a rotation during, the terms of those sitting on the committee at the time. So I like that. And I just wanted to absolutely +1 the co-chair model versus the kind of hierarchy with delegated jobs. Things could change even within a co-chair relationship, right? Where you wanted to change those roles. And I think that we should be completely flexible and supportive of our colleagues that take those roles. And the other opportunity it provides, not necessarily, but there's an opportunity for also some mentorship or some capacity building in a co-chair model, which I think anytime that we can create opportunities like that we should take advantage of it. So I mean, certainly it might not play out that way, but it could. So I like that and would wholly endorse that model. Thanks you guys for the great thought on that.
Thanks, Faith. Other thoughts or reflections on either the broader structure and vision for co-chairs or this term, this 3-year term recommendation?
Looks like Shanice has a comment.
Yeah, thank you all for your thinking around this. I think that co-chair model makes a lot of sense for the structure of our group in considering our agreements and values. I think it's not something that I feel too strongly about, but a 3-year term for co-chairs, I think given the relationship between our 4-year and 2-year staggered term, definitely leaves room for genuinely a couple of folks to have leadership in the space. So yeah, I'm thinking about what does it mean to cycle through leadership, and I'm familiar with other bodies having a much shorter terms for a chair model, but I think here there's a unique structure. So at the end of the day, I think the things that I value are the direction that we're going in, and just would encourage us to think about distributing that leadership between the group as we continue and formalize the structure.
Great, thanks, Shanice. Other reflections? I see Renfis.
I do have a slight concern on this, and that's well, in general, I think I support a co-chair structure. I think my only, slight concern on anytime we develop a co-chair structure or even any type of leadership structure is just the distribution of work. And I think as volunteers on a committee, and I've been on a few committees where, especially new established committees where there's a lot of burnout for folks who are co-chairs. And sometimes co-chairs take on an entirely new sort of exec structure that's not explicit on bylaws or delegations. So, I think sometimes work, as we're building norms together, sometimes a lot of work can be consolidated, and sometimes I think other committee members may be surprised how much work co-chairs could be taking on. So I think it's more about the concern of burnout that I'm trying to sort of propose. So as we are, I think as we're building norms and constructing these bylaws, I think my only concern moving forward is one is just keeping a good temperature check on how folks are doing as we're proceeding together, making sure we're not burning out. And I think just trying to work on good working agreements where you know, we're trying to delegate responsibilities or think fluidly around how we delegate all our volunteer roles as a committee. My only concern, of course, here is having great leadership just burn out in 1, 2, or 3 years. So that's just my concern. I don't have a solution, but you know, again, a working agreement. I'd love to see multiple folks on this committee take on, you know, a leadership role or a co-chair role throughout our terms together. So just wanted to note that.
Yeah, thanks, Ranfis. And I see a couple other hands up. Just also wanted to note that in that clause talking about 3-year terms, it does say that, you know, co-chairs can resign at any time. It doesn't require a 3-year term. So that's kind of the maximum. And since the working agreements will be reviewed at least annually, it does provide that kind of natural check-in opportunity for somebody to step out if they do feel like the workload is too much. But I do see a couple of hands up. Don't know who's were up first, Megan or Andrea?
Well, Andrea, if you were going to respond to Ranfis, that might be helpful.
I actually was just going to say it's really a term limit. It's not a requirement that somebody serve in that role for 3 years. It's just thinking that 3 years is a good chunk of time to hold that kind of responsibility and space for the committee, and wanting to make sure that there was turnover.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in with a couple comments on the overall proposal here. Well, particularly on the co-chair model. I don't have strong feelings on the 8-year term limit. That makes sense to me. So, and I think all your deliberations, I appreciate. 8 years does seem like a long time. So, so it seems like fine to me as a cap. And I like the idea of those of us involved building skills, relationships, expertise, and then being able to like continue to offer that, I guess. But I also like bringing in fresh perspective. So I appreciate all that balance. But to the co-chair thing, I like Shanice really appreciate the co-chair model, especially because when I first read the list of tasks, I was a little overwhelmed thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot of work, convening and conducting meetings, going to city council meetings. So I guess I share a little bit of Ranfis's concern there. And I'm also wondering if maybe there's some of the there is quite a bit of discussion of staff liaison role and et cetera. And so I guess I could benefit from a little bit more explanation from you all around, I guess I'm assuming a very proactive staff role in a lot of this stuff, assisting the co-chairs, but I would love to hear more about that. And then I guess my third comment on the co-chair thing is, I assume you all have done the math and thought through lots of scenarios, but I guess that when we're talking about people 3 years or maybe ending early, like, does that work with the 4-year terms that people are on? And I'm just trying to imagine various scenarios, what would happen. And I got a little not sure, but I'm curious if you all sort of did lots of scenarios there and made sure that we'd always have people who had a little bit of experience and could be chairs with the 3-year and 4-year thing. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think it does. I
think Andrea may.
Yeah,
let's let Andrea.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what we were thinking about is if somebody has agreed to sit for a second 4-year term and they are already in a leadership role, it might be easy for other people to allow them to stay in that leadership role. But that 3-year term limit really forces a change of leadership on the committee. And I think that the committee will benefit from that. I've certainly sat on committees and worked with organizations where you just keep having the same board chair because they're willing to do it. And that doesn't mean that the organization wouldn't benefit from somebody else stepping in, but kind of forcing that change is really what it's about. And of course, we think a lot of people will serve less than 3 years in this role. And, you know, maybe you serve, you know, just the last year of your 4-year term and then you step off the committee. Great.
Any comments from you all about the staff support or assistance?
Oh yeah, so I remember we had a lot of conversation about this, and I think we might not have changed it, but there's a lot of like assure and ensure in this co-chair role as opposed to do, right? Like, so yes, the staff are amazing right now and they're doing all the work. I anticipate they will keep doing all the work, but also it's the co-chair's job to advocate for the staff, supporting the committee in the ways that the committee needs to be supported. So if, materials aren't getting out in a way that is supporting the committee's work, if the committee needs meeting facilitation and it's not happening in a timely fashion, or would like an outside facilitator, just like being more in that assure and ensure role as with that staff liaison, as opposed to assuming that there is some future point where the committee no longer feels it's necessary to pay staff to put together agendas and send out the information and make sure that there's somebody here who can run the technology, and that's not going to happen.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, I don't need that anymore. I think that's.
Yeah, I think that covers it well. Also, in bylaws. Oh yes, go ahead, Michael.
The only thing I'd add is that if you take a co-chair position, there is no shame in leaving after any given amount of time. That was one of the things that it's a 3-year max, but there's no expectation that you do 3 years. There is no expectation of any. There's an expectation that after 3 years you'll leave, but there's no expectation that you will carry through those full 3 years at all.
Yeah, Rampies?
Is there a difference from, have you all discussed like how you all would have envisioned the difference between a 3-year term versus, 1-year terms with a, 3 consecutive term limit? Like, is there a difference to that approach? Because I see the differences between both structures. And one, it's constructing that it's, that we're intentionally revisiting co-chair structures every year. And so there's kind of an expectation for folks to prepare for a potential co-chair structure. So within the structure, it's like promoting that. Whereas I think how it's originally proposed, we're giving deference. There's deference to someone stepping down before you revisit the co-chair leadership. So I kind of curious, what was the discussion, and if you all explored sort of the different pros and cons, different options in considering this.
Andrea, do you want to?
I think we more focused on the amount of time we thought was the maximum amount of time we would want somebody to serve in this leadership role without a change. And I don't think I think the only complication I can think of is, well, then every year the committee is going to have to say, okay, who's going to be our co-chairs this year? But you're probably going to have that conversation anyway. So kind of documenting that that's going to happen every year. I don't think there's any problem with that. Makes a lot of sense.
I just wanted to do a quick time check. It's 7:04 right now, and we had a break scheduled for 4 minutes ago, and then picking this conversation back up after the break. So is now a decent time? James, I'm not sure what else is kind of on the agenda to cover, but is now a decent time to take that break?
I think it is, unless other committee members have thoughts about this co-chair model or the framing of terms, I guess, in the model. But we could take a break for 5 if folks want.
If there isn't comments, I might just, so that we don't lose this thought real quick, just for everyone's sake, read the language that's there and see Ranfitz and Andrea and others if that's getting, if it needs a clarification to this point that was just brought up. Mm-hmm. The language currently says term limits of a maximum of 3 years of consecutive service shall apply to co-chairs, and co-chairs' appointments shall be reviewed with a committee once per calendar year. co-chair shall be permitted to resign at any time. So Ramphis, because you asked that, I want to see, I'll put that question first to you to see if that language creates that space for that, creates enough of that space for that check-in. And obviously some of it is the practice of how we do it, but.
Yeah, I think, I think how it's, to me, it's currently constructed, it's more, the expectation that you serve out a 3-year term. But again, everyone can interpret it differently if you're to assume a leadership position. And then I think, whereas a 1-year term with a 3-year max term limit, I think it still delivers, I think, which is, having a, making it a regular conversation around how we revisit co-chair leadership. But regardless, I think either of these models still raises the same question, like, what do you do when there are multiple people interested in a co-chair position? In how it's currently constructed, are we waiting till someone steps down, or does someone say, hey, I want to, I think I want to be co-chair for this following year? So I think it's kind of like, what do we do with that? It's kind of unclear. Whereas I think maybe in sort of reviewing this once a year, having a 1-year term limit, it's like, okay, I think we're going to give space for folks who want to check in. We can deliberate and then take a vote on new leadership. But again, I'm making a lot of assumptions on how it would play out in a maximum 3-year term limit, and how that discussion would look like with folks who maybe when we do have multiple folks interested in year 2 or year 3 to be a co-chair in the event when those current co-chairs don't want to step down.
Shanice, I see your hand up too.
Yes, just really quickly, I'm feeling like I'm aligning with Ramphis, especially as, of course, structures, depending on the need, depending on the community, look different. Public bodies similar to ours, and how terms stagger and chair models look. And I'm really reflecting on, something. I guess it also depends on us kind of projecting what the needs long-term of this grant committee will look like, especially given some of the needs with the media. But I guess I'm reflecting on spaces that might have 2-year term limits. I'm reflecting on spaces that have a 6-month turnaround, in terms of what that looks like, where we have folks who might come on board, and it's already been a year. So we're kind of talking about a 3-year window where folks might be a co-chair. And so, yeah, I'm thinking about leadership that may emerge at different times in this space. And with the nature of the timeline of the grant cycles that are to come, I think it would make sense to have shorter term limits. And it's helpful to hear folks explain that 3 years is kind of the maximum in its thinking. And as I'm just reflecting on the communities we represent, and also are thinking about through our work, the understanding of what these things look like before you sign up for a particular role. I think there can be some norming around how we talk about the co-chair model if the 3-year term limit is just kind of a thing that we are not expecting folks to fill. And so those are just things that are coming up, how we might talk about the co-chair structure if it maintains that consistent 3-year 3-year term, but I'm almost just really thinking about 1.5 years or something a little shorter that will encourage leadership to emerge based off of interest in the group. And I do think that it's just a unique space, a unique group of folks that would be really exciting to see different folks take that kind of role. So that's kind of my perspective, but just wanted to concur with Runfeast and add.
Okay, I see Michael's hand up as well. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I would love to respond to that. The Shanice and Ramfis, I think that 1 year service with a 3-year maximum sounds pretty great. I think that's what we were trying to get at, was that, like, every year you'd have the opportunity to step down or ask if somebody else wanted to. So I think that adds clarity to it. And Andrea might, I think Andrea might remember better. But going back, I think that's what we were looking at, was like giving not only outs, but opportunities for other people to like want to step into that role. So I think that, yeah, I agree with Shanice and Ramfis that is, you know, that's just changing some of the wording in there.
Thanks, Michael. I do have a suggested text edit that I think may address this. So I'm going to send via chat to everybody. I don't know if we still want to take a break, but here's some suggested language that modifies that clause to kind of get a little bit more clarity about that 1 year term expectation. Or so maybe if I could propose that we still take a break and give folks an opportunity to just kind of look at this and see if it captures some of what you all have discussed. And then we can come back and continue the conversation. Does that work for folks? I'm seeing some.
So maybe we can just make this a 7-minute break instead of a 10-minute break, and we can come back at 7:20.
Okay.
All right. Thanks all.
All right.
Right, it's 7:20. Folks could come back online. Like most people are here.
All right. Also, in the break that we had, in addition to the text edits that we discussed, I also incorporated some of the language earlier that we talked about in regard to overall committee terms. So I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And we'll see when we have everybody back. Okay. So in the chat, you should hopefully be seeing language edits that attempt to incorporate some of the concerns and clarifications that were brought up in the discussion. And so I guess this is an opportunity to see if there's any other elements that need to be brought in that the committee has, or to open this up for other elements in the bylaws, recognizing that this is the term limit piece was kind of the primary element of discussion that we anticipated, but I want to give Andrea and Michael an opportunity to kind of maybe bring us home here. So Andrea, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for putting those in the chat. That's helpful. I would say that for the co-chairs, rather than 3 years of consecutive service, I think we're looking at the maximum of 3 years of service as co-chair, to kind of ensure that there's a cultivation of leadership of everyone on the committee, and that you don't just accidentally have one person or two people providing really a lot of a long time in these roles. And then the last sentence, co-chairs shall be permitted to resign. I think we might want to clarify the co-chair role here, that it's really, anybody can resign at any time. We're saying like, it's fine. You can step down from your co-chair role.
Okay, so I think I can cut the consecutive word out.
Mm-hmm.
And then were you suggesting a modification to that last sentence of co-chairs shall be permitted, or were we more just stating the intent?
I don't know if it's even necessary to include that, because of course people can resign. So I don't know if it's necessary to codify that in the bylaws. I think that's less necessary if it's being looked at every year, and the decisions being remade every year.
Okay, is there other thoughts of supporting deleting that last line? Or concern, let's say concerns with deleting that last line. So okay, seeing none, I've made that edit. And maybe we could do kind of an overall temperature check on where we've landed then with this concept of the terms, both for the overall committee members as well as for the co-chairs. What's the best way to do that? Katie, you wanna?
I would be happy to call on folks and get a temperature check. We'll start with the M's. Maria.
I like the edits that you proposed, and I don't have any issues with the way that those have been phrased so far.
Michael?
I like it.
Megan?
My temperature check is warm. I like it.
Ranky?
It's good.
Shanice?
looks good.
Faith,
Yep, I'm warm.
Jeffrey,
I'm warm.
and Andrea.
Warm. It got better. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you all. So now I guess a little bit more of just an opportunity, Michael or Andrea or others, if you do want to talk about other elements of the bylaws where there might be clarification. And then if there is none, then Sam also did want to quickly run through a couple elements of what Robin had sent us via email, which are mostly minor kind of grammatical elements. But you all have put a lot of work into the bylaws to date, so.
And just wanting to make sure that that the committee understood that we will be asking for a proposal to adopt these bylaws at this meeting. So if there is anything that would kind of keep you from supporting that, now's the time.
I will note what I can go ahead and note at least Robin's couple pieces, and then we can at least capture all those collectively. Several of the edits that Robin just picked up were grammatical edits, and we'll make sure that we have Maya, who brings that kind of eye to review this as well, but Maya, our city attorney. But one of the pieces where he did seek clarification is there's a piece, where it says members, and I need to find where it says this, members can participate in meetings via like in-person or other electronic means. And he wanted to specify that because he said, does that include email? And so what we were going to suggest there for that other electronic means is to capture like these sorts of meetings that we're having now, that these sorts of where you're live in a meeting can be, are eligible other electronic means, but you couldn't participate in a meeting through email. Let me make sure I kept find this here too.
Yeah, it's in section 9.
This
public meetings.
Yep, it says this. Right. It says decision making using telephonic or other electronic means is telephonic devices or other electronic means is permitted. And so we're just going to specify that you need to be live in participation in the meeting.
I think that's important, and maybe it's just, we could even add the sentence that says that the point of this is that our deliberations should be public, and an email is not a public participation. That's not public deliberation. That's not transparent. So something of, maybe to provide something about the intent behind that.
Yeah, I would note that the top of that section 9 does state, I'll read it, meetings of the PCEF committee and its subcommittees are open to the public and will be conducted under the provisions of Oregon Public Meetings Law, and then states that. And I think we were taking kind of template language initially, which really talked about telephonic or conference calls, and just trying to frame it in this modern era where, it's more than just conference calls, but an electronic platform that allows for live communication. But to your point, Andrew, I think that intent and practice of public meetings is captured in the bylaws.
So that was the change that Michael suggested. So we can make sure we figure out the right way to say that and capture that. But and then there's a few other elements specifically relating to how folks recuse themselves when they have a conflict of interest, and other things that are really procedural pieces that we will help define as we get into the decision-making process with the grants here in a few months' time. So those are some of the things that Robin had raised. We followed up with him and let him know that we'd be we would bring those that are relevant to changing this document here, and the others that we would respond to afterwards.
All right, any,
Oh,
oh, go ahead, Michael.
so are you, Sam, are you saying that that if we vote on this today, that changes for disclosure, conflict of interest, and conflict of interest recusals will change in the document after we've approved it? No.
No, we would simply, the question that Robin was asking is just how, if you have a conflict of interest, what's the process for recusing yourself, and how will that work? And so that's a process that, it specifically states you need to do it in the bylaws. The process for doing that is something that it's part of what we'll be doing a training on as we get into decision making, just how we state that at the beginning of each meeting where you see the agenda and whatnot. So it's more that we're going to clarify the process, but it's not changing this document.
Yeah, there wouldn't be text edits. And maybe just also another point of procedure that has come up a couple times in the subcommittee discussions is that we're referring to the process that you all take in the committee as decision making and not voting. So the structure of recusal does require a minimum number of decision-making committee members to be present. And Robin's clarification was just, what does that mean exactly on in the implementation of funding decisions? And so that'll be clarity that exists kind of in guidance that doesn't need to change the actual bylaws, but just will be some direction that we provide to you as committee members as you review applications. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so speaking of decision making, this is an opportunity if you also choose to make a decision on adopting the bylaws with these modifications that we've discussed today. And if we were to use the bylaws in that decision-making process, there would be 3 decisions that you could cast as committee members to either affirm the adoption of these bylaws, stand aside, which would count towards the affirmative decisions, or to cast a no decision, which would not count towards the affirmative, it would not count towards the affirmation of the bylaws. So this is language that we'll kind of have to, get used to in practice, but wanted to put forward what that decision-making process would look like, and that we would follow if these bylaws were to be adopted. Ranfis?
So, sorry, just to clarify. So given that there were comments and edits from Robin on disclosures, so I guess what I heard was it doesn't require any amendments or edits to the bylaws. And so what we would be voting for are finalizing the bylaws, including these recent edits that we just discussed. Is that capturing it correctly, what we're voting for?
Correct. And what really are very minor grammatical catches that Robin made. For instance, just truing up some of the margins and formatting of the document.
I guess I have a question now, since we're on the topic of conflict of interest, and I wonder if it's just something it could be answered on the procedures wise, or if it doesn't require any edits. The way I feel like these conflict of interests are structured, it's you have to raise it before a vote. I think it'd be, I would like it. I think I've noted in the past, be proactive, as we are discussing items, regardless if there's no vote or vote or no vote. It'd be for best interest of the full committee to just know what what are those conflicts of interest ahead of time, or if they're captured and shared among us. To be honest, I don't even know what current conflict of interest currently exists between my committee members, but I think just having a healthy practice of just being proactive and having them written down and shared ahead of time, and and then making sure that staff feels empowered to keep us compliant rather than expecting committee members to hold themselves compliant to this provision. But if that's something that could be addressed procedure-wise, I don't think I have any specific amendments on this.
It may be. Let me respond to that and then see, because the expectation is that as we get into decision making around the grants, in a couple months' time and begin that process, that as we flag the agendas and the particular decisions that will be made, that as each of those, we'll have a regular practice saying, please state in advance, do you have any conflicts of interest, and we'll provide you with a form where you can state that. In terms of moving in advance of that, the state has a practice where for certain boards, commissions that are specifically called out in statute, annually they're required to fill out a statement of economic interest. This is where for every single person in your household, yourself, you state where you live, all any substantive assets that you hold, your home, businesses you have interest in, and that of everyone in your household. We did look into seeing whether the state, and this is managed by the Government Ethics Commission, we did see whether they would provide that sort of resource to us, whether we could use their annual statement of economic interest filing. And unfortunately, we can't, because it's only those bodies that in statute are required to file those statement of economic interest. And so we can't sort of voluntarily opt into that system. And I think the rationale, frankly, when we looked into that was the balance of not necessarily wanting to hold personal information. That's a database that exists. The state manages it. They do it annually, and not necessarily us wanting to kind of hold and manage all that particular information. I think So I sort of want to speak to what we have there, at least, and what we expect to do from a procedures perspective as we get to decision making. But then there's a step before that, that it's where you're taking sort of that annual filing and doing that and listing all of those out. And I mean, I've done it, I've done it before. It's definitely fairly deep. I mean, you're speaking to every single any property you have investment in, any of all those pieces. So. So that's something the committee can think through. We'd have to we need to work through that a little bit more and just tease out what it would mean for us to kind of hold that sort of information.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful, Sam. I think maybe for the interest of time, I'm happy with this, and personally happy to revisit this conflict of interest piece. I'd prefer to be proactive. It sounds like there is statutory limits to access that information or what we're reporting. But I think if it sounds like we have an ability to add that if we so chose to within these bylaws, and I think I'm sort of erring here on being proactive, trying to move the envelope, trying to replicate best practices where we can for such an important program. But again, I think I'm happy to set that aside and vote for what we have here. But just wanted to, it's definitely coming up now as we're talking about this and some of the edits that I think Robin has. So I'll stop there.
If there, yeah. As we work through and practice as you'll start to see that as we get into those decision-making meetings around particular grant investments, I think that'll be a good place just to see, does this feel right? Does this feel like it's getting at it? Is there things we can beef up there, and then see whether we need to take a more even further proactive step. So,
all right. Other comments or reflections, or are people feeling ready to make a decision on the bylaws?
They look ready to me.
This is Ranfis. Motion to adopt the bylaws with edits on the chat box made by James Valdez on terms of language on term limits for committee members and term limits for co-chair positions.
And was there one more from Robin on the clarification about the email?
Yes, I want to amend that proposal. Thank you, Ranfis, and add the additional clarification around electronic participation in meetings.
Second the amended proposal.
All right, then, Katie, do you want to go through the decision-making process then and ask the committee members whether they affirm the decision, stand aside, or have a no on the decision?
Yes, and I appreciate the reminder not to ask for a vote. So just to make sure everybody understands stand aside. So an affirm is to affirm the decision as proposed and amended, and a stand aside basically supports the affirmation. The purpose of a stand aside is if people feel like for them personally, they're not sure about the decision, but they are sort of recognizing that it is the best decision for the group. And then a no is no, is in opposition to the decision. So we'll start with Maria.
I affirm the proposal.
Megan?
I affirm the proposal.
Michael?
Affirmative.
Shanice?
I approve.
Jeffrey?
Affirmative.
And Faith?
I seconded and approve, or affirm.
Oh, you did second. So, and Andrea and Ranfis already proposed and amended. So it is a unanimous consensus. The decision is made.
Woohoo!
You guys are getting better at this.
Yeah, thank you all. And we now have adopted and affirmed bylaws. Or you all have adopted and affirmed bylaws.
It's a great time. About time. It's perfect timing. Okay.
So Sam, you're next up on the agenda, just talking a little bit about meetings through November.
I think we're going to try to keep this fairly short here. We've got a lot of work coming ahead of you all in December. And so we were going to propose about two meetings between now, about 3 weeks from now, and another 3 weeks from then. Would be the two meetings that we were proposing during this RFP period before we bring you back in heavy rotation starting December. And so the ask really was during this RFP period for that we've got a couple of things that we've talked about in the past that we want to bring back. But we just would ask, and for the sake of time, unless there's something that's really burning, I would ask for the sake of time we're going to follow up via email around just scheduling those next two meetings. But we'd love to really start taking a tally of other things you may be interested in seeing so that we can start kind of just scheduling those out and bring those together. So, you know, we've obviously brought a whole range of presentations. These next two meetings, we're going to keep any nonprofits that may apply for funds away from you all. But if there's anything else you'd like to see during this open period, I'd just ask that you all email us, or certainly now if it's brief and you can flag it, let us know, and we'll go about scheduling those. And I can just say, like, for instance, one of the conversations is going to certainly be about just how do we better engage the public in our meetings, and just kind of walking through that and making sure we have a discussion around that. So that'll be one of the conversations we have in the next 2 meetings. But I know there's a few other things folks have been thinking about, and we'll dig back through that. But if there are others that are thinking about just even the next few months, please email us as you respond back to just the survey on timing, on scheduling. I know I didn't create much of an opening, but if there is anything burning, please let us know now. Otherwise, I think it'd be great to get to committee member comments. And so maybe I'll acknowledge what is very real here. We've fortunately, City Council yesterday we did get confirmation that next week City Council will be taking action on Amanda Squamfen-Yazi's appointment. So this is very much the last meeting that we've got Andrea Hamburg here with us. And so I just want to open the floor for folks to just share any comments, any thoughts, because it's been wonderful, and it's bittersweet, and I appreciate that you all were able to adopt the bylaws today at least. But I'll open the floor.
I get to talk first. This has been really such a fantastic honor, and I am just delighted that I got to spend the last 10 months working with you. I am so excited I got to support the beginning of PCEF, and I am just like deeply honored to be a part of a group of people who looked at the decision that had been made about committee makeup and what this committee wants to accomplish, and spent the time fixing an error. So I think everything is going fantastically. I'm so excited to see what you accomplish over your 8 years. And you know, thank you all for your continued work on this. PCEF winning at the ballot is definitely one of my decade highlights, and getting to support it has just been incredible. So thank you all for your service, and thanks for letting me play.
Megan?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. I wrote a haiku for you, Andrea, and then I have a few comments, but it's community norms, bylaws, and group consensus, detailed attention. That's my haiku. But that was me trying to be creative. And in general, I just want to say thank you, Andrea, for your service. I've appreciated, as noted in my haiku, your attention to kind of governance issues. It's something you said was a strength coming in, and you brought it, and I think we're benefiting from that, so thank you so much. And also just for your calm demeanor and your warmth and your attention to detail, and yeah, I really appreciated that. And of course, your leadership in terms of like demonstrating true leadership and being willing to step back so that someone else can step forward. I think that's really something I admire, and great leadership. So I wish we could have hung out with you more in in-person settings, because Zoom is a little bit limited in how much any interaction we've had that hasn't been very structured. So that's kind of a bummer about all of this, but I do know we have a mutual friend in common. So maybe we'll see each other at backyard barbecues, or, you know, in the future when we go to real events again sometime. So that's what I have to say. Thank you, Andrea.
Michael, and then Jeffrey.
I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure working with you, Andrea. I know I came into here as a neophyte. This is the first board committee experience I've had, and I probably learned more about the ins and outs, what works, what doesn't work for boards from you, and for committees. I mean, it blows my mind how much I learned from you. And so thank you for that. Thank you for all the knowledge that you passed on to me personally. And also thanks for your commitment to bike commuting. And yeah, we're gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss you. And yeah, thanks for all your hard work. It's been a real pleasure.
Jeffrey, and then Maria.
I would just like to say thank you for your service, Andrea. I think you were the first committee member I actually met in Southeast PCC. It was a pleasure. It was a good experience being the first person I met there. I love your calm demeanor and everything you brought to the table, and I really appreciate your sacrifice. You saw there was a void, and you willing to step up to that plate and make the sacrifice that you're making. I don't take it very lightly, so I'm just very inspired by you, and I hope nothing but the best for you in the future. It's been a pleasure knowing you, in this setting at least.
Maria, and then Faith.
Andrea, thank you so much for answering the call to serve on PCEF with us. Thanks for your presence, for showing up and following through, which is a big deal. I was always looking forward to the comments that you would make. I feel like they always resonated with me, and I have a soft spot in my heart for public health people who do climate justice work. So I was always looking forward to working with you and wish we could have had a longer stint here at PCEF together, but I know that we'll cross paths again in other work. So I'm one of your comrades in climate justice, and I can't wait to continue working with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria. Faith, and then Shanice.
Ditto everything else everyone said. Andrea, it's been so nice to get to know you, even though it's not nearly as well as I would like to, and I hope that we get that chance in the future. And everything that everyone said, particularly your leadership in making room for what was called for righting that wrong, and that has meant a lot to me as an example and a mentor for me as well. And so I just deeply appreciate that. And I hope this is, I feel really great knowing that you're in the community supporting PCEF. So thank you for that. Thank you for being a leader in that. And we haven't given up the idea of meeting, have we? I hope not. Like, we're going to still get together at some point. Let's do that. Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks, Faith. Shanice, and then Ramsey.
I'm feeling similarly and just want to really state my appreciation for the leadership that you really brought to this space. And I think this group is really able to benefit from you being here, and wish it could be longer. But I know in different capacities, we have to stay connected, and just want to also name, I think, especially during this time, before this uprising began, we were kind of grappling with this. And so just want to appreciate and name your willingness to step up and recognize that value of creating space for Indigenous voices here in the committee, and what an example that really means for other bodies and other groups for similar things that they might be dealing with. So just really appreciate the example that you have set, and really shows that you're a really humble, thoughtful leader, which you show to us all the time. So much appreciation to you.
Thanks, Shanice. Ramsey?
Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone said. I definitely, appreciate your leadership. I think you've definitely raised the bar for us in terms of how we think about inclusion and making space in terms of leadership and power here in the city through PCEF. And I think it reminds me of a quote from MLK where he states that the ultimate measure of a person is not where they stand in moments of comfort and convenience, but where they stand in times of challenge and controversy. And I feel like the world has changed since we first started together on this path. And I think your leadership, we can definitely feel the framework and imprints and the framework of how we set up PCEF here. So just want to thank you for that leadership. And I hope this isn't a goodbye. I expect that we will continue to interface and hopefully conspire. I don't know if conspire is the right word, but I do expect that we build the kind of future that we want to all build together for us and future generations. So thank you.
All right. Well, I know Robin couldn't be here. He will follow up with you, Andrew, but he said he's thoroughly enjoyed every bit of work getting to work with you. Andrew, I've had the fortune of working with you for now over 4 years, and I was incredibly excited when you joined the committee and having had to get to work with you here in this role. I'm bummed that I won't get to regularly see you, but for me, I'm like, now I feel like I've got to reconnect to the county and make sure that tether is stronger. So from everything you taught me about consensus-based decision-making and everything else, I'll make sure you're just down the street, so I'll make sure we schedule our regular beers and everything else. But if not that, at least everyone should know in your inbox there is an email about a gathering. So take a look there. Thank you for everything, Andrew. It means a lot. Everyone's paying attention, and it's thank you. Okay. So with that,
all right.
How we
that was the last thing on our agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. I know everyone on staff has really enjoyed working with you, how kind of thoughtful and insightful you are. So thank you.
Thank you all
Good night, y'all.
so much. I appreciate you. Thanks
everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much,
All
Andrea.
right.
And I'm going to go ahead and
Andrea.
stop the recording, and then we'll close up the meeting. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night. Good night, Andrew. Good night, everyone.
Bye.